Get ready to reimagine the future of humanity and unlock your true potential. Welcome to Reimagining Humanity's Future and Yours, hosted by Dr. David Gruder, an internationally renowned integrative psychologist, human potential expert, author, and social change catalyst, as he delves into the most urgent issues of our time. With the world facing unprecedented challenges and social and political divides growing deeper, it's time to take action. Each episode of this groundbreaking series will empower you with invaluable insights, strategies, and tools to heal these divisions and restore personal freedom and societal well-being. Whether you're a concerned citizen, a courageous leader, an influential figure, or an ambitious entrepreneur, Reimagining Humanity's Future and Yours will guide you on a transformative journey. Discover your unique role in creating a brighter future for yourself and society at large. Dr. David Gruder will draw upon his extensive knowledge and experience to provide practical solutions for shaping the world we live in. With his passionate exploration of social change, he will help you navigate through the complexities of our time and inspire you to make a meaningful impact. So, prepare yourself for an eye-opening experience as we delve deep into the heart of the matter. Reimagining Humanity's Future and Yours will challenge your perspectives, ignite your imagination, and equip you with the tools you need to reimagine and redefine the world around you. The time to transform our future is now. Join us on this incredible journey and enter a new era of possibility. For more information on Dr. David Gruder and the Reimagining Humanity's Future and Yours, visit www.rhfy.ca. Welcome to Reimagining Humanity's Future and Yours, where together, we create a brighter tomorrow. Now, here is the host of Reimagining Humanity's Future and Yours, Dr. David Gruder.
Welcome back to the Reimagining Humanity's Future and Yours show on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. I'm your host, Dr. David Gruder, the polymath of human potential and societal psychotherapist, who equips leading-edge leaders, influencers, helping professionals, and you with impactful resilience that makes it possible for humanity's most spiritually elevated future to at last emerge. This is the next episode in a periodic mini-series within the Reimagining Humanity's Future and Yours show, in which I'll reveal deeply vulnerable personal stories about my crushing defeats, mystical moments, and other pivotal turning points in life. The mini-series title is Breaking the Mold: Crushing Defeats and Mystical Moments That Sculpted Me Toward Love and Purpose. As I see it, we each have a dual-pronged life purpose: our soul growth mission, which is our deep, overarching psycho-spiritual development themes and lessons that will take us the better part of our lifetime to master, if not longer, and our impact mission, which is the unique way in which we're called to help an elevated world emerge in our chosen spheres of influence. In this episode, you'll hear a number of particularly powerful stories about crushing defeats, mystical moments, and pivotal turning points in how my impact mission emerged and unfolded. I believe the stories I've selected will boost your commitment to your own impact mission and support you on your journey in crystallizing and mastering it. If you want more after listening, you can discover whether I'm the one to help you clarify your own dual-pronged purpose, your soul growth and impact missions, and equip you to master these by going to drgruder.com/rightmatching. That's drgruder.com/rightmatching, RIGHTMATCHING. So the title of this episode in the series is Reimagining Your Impact Mission in Helping Our Best Future Emerge. Want to make more sense of your life? You're not alone. The crushing lows I've experienced in life taught me grit, turning points deepened my purpose, and mystical highs lifted me into new realms of possibility. So, again, by way of review, before I delve into these stories, I view us as having what you've heard me call a dual pronged purpose. Our soul growth mission, as I mentioned, is our highest self development purpose. That's so significant that it will require the better part of a lifetime to fully accomplish, if not longer. And our impact mission, which, as I said, I'm focusing on in this episode, is our highest calling to positively influence the world around us in our own unique ways. Again, my purpose in telling these stories is twofold. First, for you to feel less alone with your own life experiences. And second, so you can gain glimpses into how you might fully, or more fully at least, step into your own soul growth and impact missions. In the case of this episode, your impact mission. Think of this as a whodunit of self discovery. May these stories spark your genius to reimagine your path by helping you discover heightened ways to break your molds and more fully embody your unique calling. So open your heart as we dive into raw, heart wrenching, and soul uplifting stories you likely never knew about me. I'll start in childhood. As a young child, I spent a lot of time alone for reasons I'll get into in a moment. But for now, what I want to share was my two favorite things to do when I was alone as a young child. My childhood solitary games were dot to dot and mazes. So dot to dot is these little children's books where you've got on each page a whole bunch of dots that are numbered, and your job is to connect the dots in order to see what the picture is that emerges once all the dots are connected. And mazes is where it's exactly what it sounds like, where you have to trace through different mazes in order to see what the right path is to get to the exit point or the center point in the maze. And so I didn't know this as a child, but looking back, I realized that I came in wired as an integrationist. I came in wired with a thirst to connect unconnected dots and to discover pathways through mazes that take us to the outcome that we want. And with that in mind, part of why I spent a lot of time alone as a child was because I was an undiagnosed autistic as a child. And the reason I was undiagnosed was because my level of autism was very small. I was a very high functioning autistic. And back in the 1950s, when I was born and on into the 1960s, there really was no diagnostic category for mild autism. So I didn't even realize that I had grown up on the high functioning end of the autistic spectrum until I was well into adulthood. But as a child, my my mild autism resulted in my much preferring my internal world, my imagination, dot to dot, mazes, all of that stuff, over the outer world. And as a child, I couldn't read social cues to save my life. As a result of that, I became a top bullying target in elementary school. It was as though I had this invisible X on my forehead that said to the other kids, if you're looking for someone to bully, I'm the guy to do that with, because I didn't know how to read cues. And because I didn't know how to read cues and I didn't understand my autism, I adopted as a child a script that I referred to as the innocent victim. I'm being bullied, but I have nothing to do with why that's happening. I'm an innocent victim. And I wore that innocent victim script as a badge of honor as a child. And that fully implanted in me loyalty to a martyr's storyline, that I was here as punishment. I'll come back to that because that relates to a turning point that happened in adulthood. But around this time in childhood, I also decided that neither of my parents knew how the world worked, and that it was therefore on my shoulders to figure this out for myself, for them, and for my younger brother. And we knew when I was a child, my younger brother, who is 3 years younger than me, was diagnosed as full autistic by the time he was 4 years old, and I was 7 years old. And I see in hindsight that my parents were like me. They were high functioning autistics that also, of course, were never diagnosed. But that decision that it was on me to figure out how the world worked was the start of my working my way out of the autism that I didn't know I had by carefully studying people and by carefully studying current events, which I became very focused on in elementary school. And the big turning point with my impact mission emerged at the ripe old age of 11 years old, when I was given what I would later recognize as my impact mission, although at the time uh, I didn't recognize that. I didn't have a notion of an impact mission or even a life mission in general. And what came through scared me so much that it became a secret that I shared with no one, because I secretly feared that what came through to me was delusional and that my little red choo choo had gone around the bend. Because at 11 years old, what was, and again, I didn't have the language at 11 that I'm about to use with you. I didn't have a way of understanding that what had been downloaded to me as my impact mission was a specific way of helping heaven on earth emerge. And the reason it was delusional, it felt delusional to me, was because having no framework for understanding what was very clearly coming through to me, I misunderstood it as guidance that was telling me that I was the Messiah. And I knew enough at 11 years old to know that that was ridiculous and arrogant and delusional. But it was really because I was misinterpreting the guidance that I was receiving, which was simply that I had an important role to play in helping heaven on earth emerge. Well, this started to crystallize for me over a long period of time, but the crystallization began, the futurist seeds for me began to be sown when I was 6 years old. My parents, I grew up in and around the New York City area. And at 6 years old, my parents took me to the United Nations to take a tour of the United Nations in Manhattan. And of course, I had no idea at 6 years old about the politics connected to the United Nations or government dysfunction or anything like this. That the takeaway for me from that trip was this vision about how we are all first and foremost citizens of the world, and inside of that, citizens of our country, and and connected with whatever communities we're part of or whatever our religious or spiritual orientation is, and things along those lines. So the notion of what I now call nested patriotism was embedded in me, or the seeds for that were embedded in me when I was 6 years old. And nested patriotism, think of Ukrainian nested dolls, where you've got a, a, a doll that's hollow, and inside it is a smaller version of that same ceramic figure um, in a smaller size. And inside of that hollow ceramic figure is another ceramic figure that just looks exactly like the others in a yet smaller size. So those are nested dolls. And that's how I started to see patriotism as nested in that kind of way. I'll be back in a few moments to share more of my stories about the emergence of my impact mission. This is Dr. David Gruder. This is Reimagining Humanity's Future and Yours on the X Zone Broadcast Network, and I'll be back shortly. So, continuing with the stories, we move from when I was 6 years old to 10 years old. And at 10 years old, the New York 1964 1965 World's Fair was occurring. And I was blessed with having been taken to the New York World's Fair a number of times. And at the World's Fair at 10 years old, I became utterly and totally enthralled with the future from those visits. And subsequently, in 1967, at 13 years old, went to Montreal for Expo 67, which was technically called the International and Universal Exposition. And those two World's Fairs really sparked in me a massive thirst for a wonderful future. And that thirst started to take form for me in terms of what that future might look like when I was 12 years old, when a utopian vision of the future began to coalesce inside me because I became an instant fan of the original Star Trek TV series when it first started airing in September of 1966. And the utopian vision of the future that Star Trek offered to me cemented my lifelong love of science fiction and not just science fiction, but also the fantasy genre, like Lord of the Rings, for example. And in addition, at that time and through all of my growing up years, I had installed in me constitutional utopianism, a utopian vision of the United States Constitution, in my case, because I was growing up in the United States, because my dad was an attorney whose first love was constitutional law. And he had a very, what I didn't understand then, but I understand in hindsight, was a very balanced understanding of constitutional law that was transpartisan. It transcended left and right. And uh, we had a lot of debates about the Constitution at the dinner table as I was growing up. So I ended up getting steeped in constitutional utopianism during those regular debates in the House that gave me that utopian vision of what the United States had been intended to become. And of course, I didn't know at the time in childhood what I later learned through a wonderful little soundbite that the father of a CEO that I was the mentor of was fond of saying that his father had said to him, which was, democracy, great concept, never been tried. So that leads me to the next big turning point in my life, which also happened in childhood. And these are all turning points connected to the emergence of my impact mission, which was at 15 years old when my parents sent me to Woodstock in 1969. And the way that happened was through naivete. So I was very involved in music and acting growing up. In fact, my first solos, instrumentally and vocally, were in fifth grade. And I was expected to become a professional musician, which I knew by the time I was a teenager that even though music was my first love, psychology was my calling. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The point of this is that at 15, my parents were kind enough. I don't know how they did this because they, at that time, were not particularly well off financially, but they managed to scrape together enough money to send me off to a camp for the performing arts in the summertime. And the spring of 1969, the camp director sends a note home to all of the parents saying, for the first time in the camp's history, we're going to have an optional field trip to a music and arts festival in upstate New York. Do you want to send your kid? Now, nobody knew what the original Woodstock Festival was going to be ahead of time. And so my parents naively looked at me after reading the letter from the camp director and saying, well, do you want to do this? And I was jumping out of my skin. I thought this was really cool, even though I didn't know what I was signing up for either. And so they signed me up to go to Woodstock. And I thought, of course, that I was going to Woodstock for the music. And don't get me wrong, the music by and large was just over the moon, with the exception of at least one performer that I recall very distinctly being so stoned when he was on stage that he couldn't perform to save his life. But he was the exception. I mean, the music by and large was really over the moon. But what I could never have known ahead of time was that I was actually being guided to Woodstock. It was actually kind of being orchestrated for me to go there in order for me to experience the wisdom underneath a cliche in the 1960s. The cliche of the 1960s was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But what started to hatch in me as a result of my experiences at Woodstock was the wisdom underneath that cliche, because we were aware. We were being told by the concert promoters in between, when one band was breaking down and the next band was setting up, how the world's eyes were on us, which they were. There were news helicopters circling and sending feeds back to their networks, so that there was live coverage of the Woodstock Festival on the major news networks while this was unfolding. And the organizers knew that. They told us in the audience that. And so they were concerned that 500,000 of us could easily deteriorate into rioting. And they wanted us to really show to the world that it was possible for 500,000 people to have each other's backs, a temporary city, to have each other's backs, even if only for 3 days. And we did join together in that mission. And so what I started to understand, it took me a while to unpack what I'm about to put into words. It took me a couple of years after Woodstock to find fully the words for what I experienced at Woodstock. But what I experienced was that what was underneath the sex part of sex, drugs, and rock and roll was that my generation was searching for deeper ways to be intimate in our relationships above and beyond the societal expectation of a marriage contract. So beyond the expectation that you were supposed to get married and children, what was the deeper intimacy that we were craving? That was the wisdom underneath the sex part of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll cliche. The drugs part was that my generation was looking for fuller ways to be authentically who we are, in contrast to the conformity that was installed in American society in the 1950s, and then spread around a lot of the world as a result of that in the 50s and 60s. So underneath the drugs part was actually a search for authenticity instead of conformity. And the rock and roll part was that for the first time in the history of music in the 1960s, popular music contained lyrics that told us that we had more power to help create a better world than we believed we did. So what happened for me at Woodstock was that the seeds were planted for me to understand our three core drives as human beings. We have the drive for authenticity, to be who we truly are. We have the drive for connection, to bond with others in deep and collaborative ways. And we have the drive for impact, which is the drive to influence the world around us in positive ways? Well, those three core drives are our fundamental human nature, and they're also the foundation of our innate integrity, which we sacrifice as children when we need to survive trauma because survival trumps integrity. But authenticity is about self-integrity, connection is about relationship integrity, and impact is about collective or societal integrity. And what that means is that a whole human being is one third me, that's authenticity, one third we, which is relationship integrity, it's connection, and one third us all, which is impact, societal or collective integrity. Well, these are the seeds that were planted in me at Woodstock that have influenced my impact mission for my entire life. And also being at Woodstock renewed my faith and hope for a better future after having felt crushed by John F. Kennedy's assassination in 1963 when I was only 9, but I was utterly traumatized by his assassination. And then later, having felt crushed by the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy Sr. within a month of each other in 1968. And then Woodstock happens in 1969. That renews my hope, my belief in a better future for humanity. Well, I came back from Woodstock and realized that, and again, I didn't have a term for what I'm about to say, but I realized that I was transpartisan. And what I mean by transpartisan was that the way I saw things was beyond left and right politically. And what happened in my high school, which I'll tell you more about after an upcoming break, was that my high school was very polarized. We had one group that was for the war in Vietnam, the other group that was against the war in Vietnam. And so the group that was against the war in Vietnam wore black armbands to protest the war. And so the group that was for the war in Vietnam adopted white armbands to wear to protest the protesters. And I came to the conclusion at age 16 that that was just not helpful. And I wanted to figure out a way to get my peers, these kids in high school, on the same page, talking the same language. And so I came up with what I thought was a brilliant idea to help that happen. And after the upcoming break, I will tell you what that supposedly brilliant idea was and what it led to. So, after another brief break, we'll be back. And this again is Reimagining Humanity's Future and Yours on the X Zone Broadcast Network. See you in a few moments. Well, we're back. So, to continue with the story, this brilliant, I thought, idea that I came up with was to create an armband that had two strips sewn together. One was white, one was black. And across both of them was going to be the phrase anti-polarization. And I didn't know how to sew. I managed to recruit my mother, who did know how to sew, into creating this armband for me. So she creates the armband, and I proudly wear this armband to school with the intention of bringing these two groups together, getting them on the same page. And within moments of arriving at my public high school, I'm surrounded by white armband and black armband kids who are looking at my armband, and they all start screaming at me the exact same message. David, you're a coward. You refuse to take a stand. Take a stand. Stop being a coward. And in that moment, I realized that my prayer had come true in a really screwed up way, because my prayer to get them on the same page came true, but at the expense of making me the fall guy. I was getting crucified. I was getting criticized, but they were on the same page. And in that moment, I made a vow to myself at 16 years old that I was going to figure out a way to bring diverse perspectives together without becoming the sacrificial lamb in doing that. Now, at 16, of course, I had no idea how to do that, but that was the vow I made at 16. And that also helped to craft my impact mission. Well, my impact mission got further cemented in 1970. In 1970, on May 4th, 1970, the Kent State Massacre occurred. And the Kent State Massacre was where there were protests against the war that were going on at the Kent State University campus, and the National Guard was brought in, and they fired on these kids that were protesting, and there were deaths, and there was blood and destruction, and it was a horrific massacre. And what happened for me was another trauma. So the resurgence of hope that I had experienced from being at Woodstock in 1969 got crushed again a year later in the aftermath of Kent State, as it became clear to me that this had been the final nail in the coffin that caused the human potential movement that was emerging in the 1960s to silo into three separate groups. I'll say a little bit about that in a moment, but first I want to go back to what I was saying about our three core drives. So what my generation, the baby boomers, didn't realize was that our mission was to help unify not just mind, body, and spirit, but to help unify me, we, and us all, to help unify authenticity, connection, and impact. And that was starting to happen, but we didn't fully understand what we were hatching. And so the powers that be did succeed at crushing my generation's ability to fully get conscious about what our mission was in what I was just saying. And so the human potential movement siloed after the Kent State Massacre into one group that was the self-developers, another group that were the connectors, the relationship-oriented folks, and a third group that I refer to not in a pejorative way, but in a positive way, as do-gooders. So the self-developers decided, well, we can't change the world after all. All we can do is work on ourselves. And if you don't like who I am, well, that's your problem. And the connectors were so focused on intimacy and relationship that if I have to give up me to be loved by you, well, so be it. And the do-gooders were so focused on retaining the belief that we could change the world for the better, that they were willing to sacrifice their relationships and their own well-being in order to try to create a better world. And actually, they developed a disdainful attitude towards self-developers because they viewed self-developers as being self-absorbed and narcissistic. And so as a psychologist, or, I wasn't a psychologist then, but I knew at 16, as I mentioned, that even though my first love was music, my calling was psychology, even though I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with psychology, other than that I was called to help a better world emerge in some way. And so all of this started to click into place. I started to recognize a little bit more about what I was called to do, which was basically to reunify the self-developers, the connectors, and the do-gooders, because this fractioning of the human potential movement was really problematic. And so at that time as well, people started recognizing leadership traits in me that I didn't recognize in myself. My self-esteem was down by my ankles. I was unknowingly trying to pass as though I was non-autistic by really carefully studying people to figure out how to read social cues and how to function in the world and all of those things that I was sharing earlier. And so these adults who were starting to recognize leadership traits in me, it resulted in my being appointed as a junior in high school, the vocal director of musicals during my final 2 years of high school, um, while I was learning how to do finely tuned collaboration in performing in a wide range of large and small music performing groups and completing 7 semesters of college equivalent music theory while still in high school. And I was also appointed a student member of a local government committee. And I didn't know why this was happening, but the seeds of others seeing leadership traits in me were being planted. Well, the next thing that happened in the evolution of me viewing myself as a futurist happened when I was an undergraduate in my favorite history course of all time, which was called History of the Future, in which we were taught how to function as futurists. And that cemented my passion as a futurist. And then, as a senior in college, as an undergrad, my clarity about being an integrationist was cemented in a senior seminar that was required of all psychology majors. And we were required to do a senior thesis. And I decided that my project was going to be to integrate three very, very different schools of psychology and psychotherapy: psychodynamic, like Freudian and Jungian, etc., and behavioral psychology, like B.F. Skinner and folks like that, cognitive behavioral folks today, and the existential humanistic psychology approach. And my professor for that course said to me, pick another project. Integrating those three schools of thought is impossible. And he was very, very well meaning, and he was the chair of the psych department who was teaching this course. And I was on a mission. I couldn't help myself. I said, I'm doing this anyway. Flunk me if you need to. And so I did the paper. And much to his credit, when I submitted the paper, he said to me he was wrong, that these three diverse schools of thought could be integrated. He hadn't seen how to do it, but I had. And so my integrationist mindset continued to gather momentum in the 1970s, where at the ripe old age of 22, I was hired. I was appointed as an administrator of what was the first professional association in what was going to become the integrative medicine world. So this was called the Association for Holistic Health, and its mission was to help birth an integrated approach to medicine that married conventional Western medicine with alternative and indigenous and traditional medical approaches. And that's where my devotion to integrative health, integrative psychology, and integrative medicine became deeply rooted. And then as in my master's and doctoral program, I did more integration, because rather than getting a PhD in either clinical or organizational development psychology, I got a PhD in both. In my PhD is in clinical and organizational development psychology. And that's where my vision of integrative human potential got solidified, about bridging psychology, spirituality, business, and society. And I ended up living a pretty enviable life. I had a flourishing career after finishing my doctorate. My first book came out in 1996. It was called Sensible Self-Help: The First Roadmap for the Healing Journey, which received a local Health and Wellness Award in San Diego, a San Diego Book Award in Health and Wellness, and a national book award, Mental Health Book of the Year award from then Collier's. And I found myself in a seemingly bulletproof marriage, which started to deteriorate and unravel in 1998 from a relentless series that lasted 4 years of back to back personal life traumas that neither my first wife nor I were mature enough to navigate well. And in the midst of all of that, in 1999, I became the co-founder and first president of the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, which was another innovative, integrative specialty area in the field of psychology. And that organization, I'm very, very happy to say, is still flourishing in 2025 as I record this episode. And ultimately, I achieved financial independence. Well, all of that fell apart. And in the next segment, I'm going to tell you the story of that crushing turning point that had two pieces to it, where my life fell apart in the early 2000s. This is Dr. David Gruder. This is Reimagining Humanity's Future and Yours on the X Zone Broadcast Network, and I'll be back with you momentarily. And here we are again. So, as I promised, turning point, two crushing defeats, crushing experiences. One was a crushing defeat, the other was what you would call technically in the field of traumatology, vicarious trauma, that happened within a few months of each other in 2001 and 2002. So in September of 2001, my mother was still alive and was still living in the family house that I grew up in the second half of my childhood. And she had gotten to the point in her life at that time where she was ready to sell the family house. My dad had died in 1988, and now we're in 2001, and mom didn't want to stay in that house any longer. It was too big for her as she was aging. And so I had gone back to New York to help her prepare the house to be sold. Well, that happened to be in New York when 9/11 occurred. And so I was in the New York area on 9/11 and in the aftermath of 9/11. And I knew people who had died in during 9/11 in the World Trade Center. Actually, one of the people I grew up with who lived around the block from me was a first responder fireman who died trying to rescue people in the collapse of the World Trade Center. And one of my first cousins didn't die because even though his subway stop for his job in Manhattan was in the World Trade Center, underneath the World Trade Center in that subway station, he was on a business trip to upstate New York that day, and so he didn't die. Well, I immediately wanted to go into New York to help with this disaster, and the mayor at that time was pleading with people to not come in because they had already far too many people wanting to help them they could utilize, and that he was saying, stay away, don't come. Well, I went to Ground Zero on the 1 week anniversary of 9/11, and that was very, very powerful. I went as close to Ground Zero as I possibly could. I was on a mission. I wanted to pray and meditate as close to Ground Zero as I possibly could. And I was on this kind of mission where I must have had this protective bubble around me or something, because I went into an area that was cordoned off and you could only get in with wearing a credentials badge. And I walked straight through. Nobody said a word to me. And I meditated in the gardens behind St. John's Church, which was one of the staging areas for the media and for the rescue and recovery operations that overlooked Ground Zero. And I sat there for a couple of hours meditating and praying. And what I experienced, call me crazy or call me not, depending on your belief system, but what I experienced was this massive set of angel wings that were wrapping themselves around Ground Zero, offering healing energy. And it moved me to tears. It was just unbelievably moving. After I finished the meditating and praying that I felt called to do, I then walked around the neighborhoods immediately surrounding Ground Zero and saw these makeshift, spontaneous street side shrines that had been created with candles and flowers and posters saying, "Have you seen this person?" Meaning somebody who had been in the World Trade Center and might have died, might not have, but they weren't able to track that person down. And letters that people had written about this trauma. And what I found unbelievably moving was that the vast majority of the letters that I saw in these spontaneous street side shrines that people had written were letters saying, "We Americans need to understand how we inadvertently contributed to this happening to us." And under 10% of the letters were "nuke the bastards" kinds of messages. That was deeply moving to me, that in the midst of the people who were being the most traumatized, there was a desire to somehow turn massive trauma into elevation, into something that would create a better world. And when the foreign policy statement in response to 9/11 was issued 3 weeks later, that was basically the equivalent of a "nuke the bastards" kind of foreign policy statement. Something snapped in me. And what I heard in me was, "David, you've been playing too small." Now, I had a national reputation as a psychologist at that time. And yet I'm hearing inside me this message from what felt to me like higher love and wisdom saying to me, "David, you're playing too small." And what downloaded through me was a document called A Declaration of Global Responsibility, which was 10 principles guiding an integrated approach to dealing with the psychological root causes of terrorism, which I called in that document fanaticism disorder. And so the document unpacked what fanaticism disorder was and offered a holistic approach to dealing with those root causes, which certainly included containing crazy people, but it didn't just include that. It also included preventive strategies and trauma healing and things along those lines. So an integrative, holistic framework. And when that was finished downloading through me, I realized I had this audacious dream that I had no idea how it could ever come true, which was I wanted to be brought to the world's the working capital of the world community, which wasn't New York City. That was the diplomatic or symbolic capital with the United Nations. But the world, the working capital of the world community was Geneva, Switzerland, and I wanted to be brought to Geneva, Switzerland, to train a group of ambassadors to some international governing body like the United Nations in how to do healing. I had no idea how that was going to happen, but that was the commitment that I committed to after hearing this guidance. Well, a couple of years after that, I got an invitation from two NGOs, non-government organizations, to be paid to come to Geneva, Switzerland to train a group of ambassadors to the World Trade Organization in collaborative negotiation techniques. And so that was the beginning of my understanding what that download was about. David, you've been playing too small. And all of this was orchestrated, just like my being sent to Woodstock was orchestrated. And all of the different life experiences that I get to look back on with 2020 hindsight were all orchestrated. And what emerged was the core of my impact mission. So I'll share with you now my impact mission statement. I lovingly co-create a spirit-aligned world of integrity, collaboration, and abundance by vulnerably exposing my heart, wisdom, and flaws. I'll say that again. Or you can just, if you're watching the replay, just put this on pause so you can take it in. I lovingly co-create a spirit-aligned world of integrity, collaboration, and abundance by vulnerably exposing my heart, wisdom, and flaws. What I didn't have a way of knowing was that 6 months after I was in New York with 9/11 and recovering from that and downloading this Declaration of Global Responsibility, 6 months after that, my first wife announced to me that what I thought was our bulletproof marriage was over. And at that point in time, we had built our careers together because she was a psychologist too. And so we had built our business together over the course of our marriage. So in that moment, my supposedly bulletproof marriage fell apart. And I didn't, in my recovering from the dissolution of that marriage, I had to take a cold, hard look at my unintended contributions to the dissolving, the untenability of that marriage, and that was very helpful and illuminating, even though very painful. But marriage fell apart. The way I had constructed my career had fallen apart, and shortly after that, my financial independence crumbled. So suddenly, I found myself essentially starting from scratch and having to fully regroup professionally and financially. And so, what ended up happening was a bunch of things that I'll talk about in the final segment of this episode. But I was doing international keynoting and training programs in 8 countries on 3 continents. And as I said, brought to Geneva a couple of years after my divorce to train that group of World Trade Organization ambassadors. So in the final segment, I'll share a little bit about what has happened since then that has helped to refine my impact mission into what it is today and what I offer today, in order to kind of wrap up this particular episode in this mini series on basically our dual pronged life purpose, our soul growth mission, which, as I said, I covered in the first episode in this mini series, and and impact mission, which I'm covering in this episode. This is Dr. David Gruder. This is the Reimagining Humanity's Future and Yours show on the X Zone Broadcast Network, and I'll be back momentarily. So, in the aftermath of my divorce, as I was picking up the pieces and focusing on my unintended part, my unconscious part in contributing to the demise of my first marriage. Of course, my first wife had her part in it too, but that's not relevant to my growth. What's relevant to mine was my part. I had to take a really deep look at my integrity deficits, which were hidden from me because the only parts of integrity that I focused on or defined as integrity had to do with integrity with impact mission, integrity with helping to make the world a better place. But what I had been severely neglectful of in pursuing my impact mission and pursuing that core drive of mine was that I was self neglectful. I neglected my own personal well being, and I was relationship neglectful. I didn't have an affair. Well, actually, I did, but it wasn't with a person. I had an affair with my impact mission. So, my desire to help make the world a better place in my own unique ways resulted in my neglecting my own well being and my cherished relationships. So I had to take a really close look at how I had misdefined integrity and came to recognize, as I mentioned in the first segment, that integrity has three prongs to it that go back to our three core drives. Our core drive of authenticity is about self integrity. Our core drive of connection is about relationship integrity. And our core drive of impact is about societal or collective integrity. Well, I was out of integrity with my relationship integrity and my self integrity components of dimensional integrity. And as I came to recognize and heal from that, I was simultaneously kind of blown away because what people were telling me was that if I was known as an expert in anything, and I have been known as an expert in a number of different things over the course of my life, the unifying field of my expertise was integrity. And here I'm dealing with the ways in which I had created or co created a lot of harm through my unrecognized integrity deficits. And so this led to my next book that I wrote after Sensible Self Help in 1996 that won those two book awards that I mentioned earlier. It resulted in my writing a book called The New IQ: How Integrity Intelligence Serves You, Your Relationships, and Our World. And that book went on to receive 6 awards in a more diverse range of categories than my publisher of that book at that time had ever heard of a book receiving. It received awards in social change, current events in politics and society, conscious business and leadership, health and wellness, um, um, transformational psychology, and self help. Well, books aren't generally that interdisciplinary, but again, remember, I've been crafting this narrative around how my mind has always been integrative, and I wrote The New IQ to integrate integrity. And I was very gratified to see that my mission was accomplished by virtue of how diverse the book awards, the book award categories were that the awards that this book received led to. And it also led to my being named by Radio TV Interview Reports America's Integrity Expert. So that resulted in my keynotes and training and consulting and mentoring and media appearances taking off again including becoming a pillar faculty for a large international business development training organization, in addition to at one time being co-head of faculty and the faculty integrity team co-head as well for that organization, and also for a period of time on its board. So um, my career took off again, but the pain that I experienced over the demise of my career and the guilt I felt over my unintended and unwitting contributions to the demise of my first marriage left a sustained money wound in me, where I was doing all of these wonderful things in the world, but I wasn't recuperating. I wasn't regaining my financial independence. And anyway, that all led to a lot of work that I'm still doing around regaining my financial independence, to be perfectly um, transparent with you. But it led to my being invited to do a TEDx talk that was on integrity. It was called The Hijacking. You can find it on YouTube or on my website. It cemented my clarity about societal spells that need to be outgrown and the societal and personal dynamics that spawn those spells that have been hijacking humanity that we still need to recover from. And my focus was on making integrity profitable. So I was doing a lot of business mentoring, which I still do, and that ended up in co-authoring two best-selling business books in the early 2000s called The Nimble Company and The Nimble C-Suite that I co-authored with, unfortunately, the now late Mark S.A. Smith. And I'm working on a second edition of that is on my shoulders now to craft on my own. And it also led to the emergence of my Center for Enlightened Self-Sovereignty, uh, and and being invited by the CEO of the X-Zone Broadcast Network, the wonderful Rob McConnell, to host this show, the Reimagining Humanity's Future and Your show. And all of that led to my crafting something that is called the Spark Blueprint. Spark is an acronym that ends in the letter C rather than the letter K. And it's the third generation of what was initially birthed in sensible self-help in the 1990s, and then later became what I recrafted in the 2008 book, the New IQ: How Integrity Intelligence Serves Your Relationships and Our World, and the Spark Blueprint and Impactful Resilience are the next evolution of that material in response to today's insane societal breakdown and polarization and divisiveness and hatred. The Spark Blueprint, Spark is an acronym where the S in Spark is shatter spells, the societal and personal spells that prevent us from joining together to co-create an elevated future for humanity. The P in Spark is picture the future, picture the most elevated future you want for humanity, your loved ones, your business, yourself, etc. And the A in Spark is align your dual-pronged purpose, your soul growth and impact missions, with that future that you most want to help emerge. So you're clear on your role in helping that future emerge. The R in Spark is rise your capacities. Once you're clear about what your unique role in helping your your version of an elevated future for humanity to emerge, what capacities do you have to elevate in order to actualize your dual-pronged mission your dual-pronged purpose, your soul growth and impact missions. And the C is collaborate with other people and with well-chosen initiatives to amplify your impact in embodying and actualizing your dual-pronged purpose in helping that future emerge. That is what I view as the framework for the next evolution in the human potential movement and the next evolution of humanity from Homo sapiens, in which we are over identified with being human animals, to what I believe is the next species that we are in the midst of evolving into, which is really why we're in such turmoil right now, because that evolution is happening when we don't fully realize what's happening. And that evolution is into what I call Homo spiritus, which is where we are worldly conduits of higher love, wisdom, and power in the physical world. So we're not denying that we are in physical bodies, but we identify as human spirits rather than over identifying as human animals. And that is what my mission is for the rest of my life, is to help that happen as a societal psychotherapist. And so I have a gift for you for having listened to this episode. It's about how you can take your own next huge steps toward living your dual-pronged purpose, your soul growth and impact missions. It's called Shatter Barriers, Build Resilience, Amplify Impact, Your Path to Elevated Purpose. And you can access it at thecess.com/shatter. So that's THECESS.com/shatter, SHETTER, SHATTER, thecess.com/shatter. The next age of human potential is upon us, the age of Homo spiritus. I hope you'll join me in helping it emerge, harvesting gifts of great value from all outside the box life experiences is an absolutely vital skill for all who value becoming ever more authentic, connective, and impactful. And crystallizing and actualizing your higher purpose is more important today than ever for those of us who are committed to doing our uniquely authentic part in helping humanity elevate. And so the world needs you, your nation needs you, your loved ones need you, you need you. Boost your impact in helping the future you most want to emerge. I enthusiastically invite you to tune in again next time for another spell-busting, uplifting, and actionable episode on how together we can and will build a better future for ourselves and for humanity.